to share something that the Lord kind of spoke to me this morning, and it's what is feeding you? What are you feeding on? What fills you? And it was John 4. I was reading in John 4 where Jesus says this. He says, "Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, 'Rabbi, eat.'" This was when Jesus goes and he has the encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. And they come back with some food. I'm assuming it was Chick-fil-A, just because that's what I'm craving, because I haven't had it in over a year. But they bring in the Chick-fil-A nuggets. I'm assuming the big platter, and they say, "Rabbi, eat." But in verse 32, he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." So the disciples said to one another, "Has anyone brought him something to eat?" And Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." And that just so hit me, especially with what we've been experiencing the last 12 months that we've lived here. What am I feeding on? What fuels me? Jesus says clearly that his food is not the disciples' food, that what is filling him and feeding him and giving him nutrients and giving him energy and giving him life is simple obedience to the Father, to do what the Father has placed before him to do, period. That's it. That's what fills him. The disciples were different. The disciples, many times we find them arguing about who's the greatest, and so they would feed off of competition with one another. The disciples enjoyed the crowds and the many people coming. In fact, they were bewildered at times when Jesus would say things that would offend people and cause people to leave. And they're like, "Jesus, didn't you know that you offended them? You offended the Pharisees." And so what fueled them was feeling greater than the other one. They would ask, "Who's the greatest among us?" It would fuel them to see the crowds that were coming. But that's not what fed Jesus. And it just caused me to ask that question of myself. What actually fuels me? I think we would like to say, we like to give the nice, religious, correct answer that, well, it's simple obedience, man. As long as I know that I'm obeying Jesus, I am satisfied. I am fulfilled. And maybe we think that until the other things are taken away. And that's some of what we've gone through this last year. We were, at a church that was a larger church and felt pretty important and felt good. And that's not bad. That's a great thing. But when that's taken away and you're placed in a position where we're at, where we're just starting out, where we're just meeting people, and that ministry success is suddenly not there, and the adulation and the applause is not there, man, I found myself missing that. I'll be honest. It was a struggle. It's been a struggle. And the Lord has really challenged me in these last couple months about what actually is fulfilling me and what am I feeding on. It needs to be the pure, simple joy of knowing that I am obeying him, that I'm walking in right relationship with God, and that that's enough. Everything else is just extra credit. Everything else is dessert. I'm not saying that someone honoring you or people even applauding or saying that's a great message or those kind of things are necessarily evil, not at all. But that's dessert. You can't live off of that. That can't be your main sustenance. And I feel like we need to examine ourselves. What a great time to examine ourselves. When we've been deprived of certain things, what is it that fulfills you as a person? Is obedience to the will of the Father enough? Or do you have to have more? The problem is if what you have to have isn't obedience to the Father, that is actually not good for you. It's actually toxic to you. And I think many times that's why God removes those things from our lives, so that we realize, wow, I've become super dependent on that. We go through sugar cravings. We say, man, I'm getting headaches. If I don't drink coffee in 24 hours, I go through some major withdrawals. I get irritable. My wife can tell when I haven't had coffee. But we need to be dependent on obedience to the Father and nothing else. That is what fulfills us. That I know I'm obeying him, I'm doing his will, and everything else is extra credit. So what are you feeding on? What are the things that maybe you realize I shouldn't be relying on this for my joy and for my sustenance? And just let the Holy Spirit speak to you and examine you just like he did to me this morning to say, man, what are those things that I need to not rely on? And Lord, help me to rely on what Jesus relied on, which was simply to do the will of the Father, and that is enough. That's more than enough. that fills me with joy.